Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Um, Welcome to the second webinar from everybody here at Notio. My name's Ed Beechner-Collins, and I head up the sales and marketing here at Notio. And today I'm joined by two colleagues, Finn Robertson, who some of you recognize some of the names on the attendee list. You may have actually communicated with Finn, who heads up customer support in Europe, and Martin Chalafu, who looks after customers in North America and Canada. So today, what we're going to do is just for people who are new to Notio, I'm just going to do a very brief overview and explain how we developed the product, our history, where it comes from. There's also just a reminder for people who may or may not be aware, but we actually have the previous webinar which explains some useful things about how Notio works, and then we'll move on to the main topic, which is how to test with Notio, and that covers outdoor testing as well as testing indoors on a velodrome and so on. There is the opportunity to ask questions, so please ask us questions. There's an opportunity for us to answer those at the end, which again is, you know, sometimes it's a little difficult to cover everything when you're presenting on topics like this. So please use the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get those answered during this webinar. So just, you know, the whole concept of Notio started. Notio is a company that's a wholly owned subsidiary of Argon 18, who's a bicycle manufacturer. And obviously, if you've been watching some of the world track cycling championships, you know, our bike sort of figured in a lot of the medals and maybe one or two records that were won. So I guess from that perspective, there's always a heritage within the organization to learn about how we make things better and how we improve and try and find, you know, more speed. And that's obviously not just related to bikes. And in 2016, there was a decision in the company to try and figure out how we could put sensors, you know, inside a bike. And you know, looking at the picture on the left there, it's, you know, a pedo tube sticking out the front of the bike, building electronics into it. And that obviously was, you know, it's a notoriously difficult thing to do, because obviously manufacturing bicycles, it's quite difficult to put electronics inside. So we decided to try and say, okay, can we take that electronics and make it available outside the bike? And the original aim of the device was to try and obviously measure your coefficient drag, or, you know, how do you actually, you know, hone your position and stuff like that. So we produced a device that was allowing you to bolt that onto your bike and go and test, but also the vision was to connect it with other sensors. Then we said, okay, that's actually quite an ambitious plan. And last year, 2 years ago, we started to work with a lot of federations and teams to develop that concept and actually really hone the product. And then obviously for full public launch in 2019, September of 2019, we launched the product. But I guess the reason for explaining the history is the subject of trying to put a device on the bike to measure coefficient drag outside is extremely challenging. And we've been doing it for quite a number of years. We have learned a lot of different things about how you do that, and, you know, how not to do it, I guess. And then also by working with some of the world's best athletes, and again, pointing back to the Danish, you know, team winning the World Championships, the track this past couple of weeks, and breaking a record. While Notio wasn't the main factor, but they did use that in their preparation to try and help. And I guess we learn from that, and we try and take some of that and put it back into our product and help develop and all that kind of good stuff. So just to recap, we so one of our big users, Dan Bingham, who is obviously working with that Danish team, we had a chance to chat with Dan. And again, this link in this presentation will be available afterwards, so you'll be able to go back and watch it. If you haven't, you're able to go and do that at any time. It's on our YouTube channel, so feel free to go and listen. So that's obviously quite a useful thing to do. Right, so to get into the agenda and what we're here to talk about today and how to test with Notio, I'm going to hand over to Finn to start, who works in our support. And again, anybody who's needing support with the product, or if you're thinking of investing in Notio and you want to buy one, you know, we have a team, and we're obviously really keen to help and answer any questions, whether you're thinking or whether you've already got the product. So anyway, over to you, Finn. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ed. So yeah, hi, I'm Finn Robertson. I cover customer support for Europe. So we're going to start off with today's subject of how to test with Notio, and we'll focus on the two different ways to test, both indoor and outdoor. So we'll start off talking about testing outdoors, and then we'll cover testing indoor later. Originally, Notio was developed as an outdoor testing tool, even though we know it works inside in a controlled environment, and it can bring you good results in a controlled environment inside. Yeah, primarily it was made as an outdoor tool. So this first part of the webinar, we're going to cover subjects such as the protocol, calibration, benchmark ride, and failure of your benchmark ride and potential error messages you may see if your benchmark ride has failed. So I'll let my colleague Martin start with the protocol topic.
Martin, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Martin, the customer support for Notio in North America. All right, thank you, Finn. Let's start by saying that I/O testing takes time, and that to get results, you will need to apply a little bit of scientific rigor. That's where our testing protocol will come in handy. Understanding that a protocol is simply a recipe for performing your home testing and training activities is key. Following a protocol will ensure you that you have both a clear idea of how and where you will do the experiment and have all the materials needed. The Notio app offers a tool just for this. It's called the Benchmark Ride, and will allow you to structure your first aero test and calibration procedures. I will get into that on the next slide, but first let me talk a little bit about safety. Because when testing, we encourage you to find a quiet path as free as possible from traffic. And also you might be a high-level cyclist, but it is important to keep in mind safety basics rules while you're on the road, and especially when you're testing. So be aware of everything on the road and signal your intentions appropriately. So let's talk about calibration. Calibration is probably the most important thing to consider when starting out using your Notio, and this is in order to get good and reliable results. Why
so,
calibration?
Martin, I just break in there. I guess for some people, you know, the question about calibration, and I guess I just try to, I mean, I'm a coach myself, so I understand how some of these things are really important. And I would just make the point for everybody listening on the webinar that, you know, while it's not a direct comparison, but I think if you go back many years ago when power meters first came out, there was a lot of, you know, not arguments, but a lot of discussion about how best to to do, use that kind of product outside, and, what kind of tests you did. There was a lot of discussion around testing inside versus outside, which is still there today, interestingly. People realizing when they go on Zwift and stuff like that, there's a slight difference to outside and things like that. And even though some of you, I know, will have been involved with power meters way back, knowing some of the names that are on the attendee list, but I can remember using the power meter first, and before every time I went out, I had to press calibrate. And of course, it's like, okay, have I calibrated the power meter? But even now today, for some of the products out there, they've, you don't have to calibrate as much and stuff like that. So in our world, in Notio world, the calibration is obviously, it's not the same, but it's something similar. And it's really important to set that baseline so that you're collecting accurate data, and no different to how you apply things like, if I'm testing and I'm trying to work out where my fitness is, and no different to our recommendations. We're all probably aware of our 5-minute roads, our 1-minute roads, our 20-minute climbs and stuff like that. And we see that people who use the product tend to, and when we test ourselves, we have these sort of locations that we tend to go back to and use when we're testing. So sorry, Martin, but back to you. I just thought I'd make that point more as a coach than somebody trying to talk about Notio.
Thank you very much, Head, for this clarification. So to go with the first topic, why calibrate? The calibration is used to make sure that the wind speed is correctly measured by the Notio's pitot tube. It's important to understand that the rider, his bike, and equipment creates turbulence around the pitot tube, as the pictures shown on the screen. Because of this, the airspeed measured by the Notio's position is slightly different than the rider's true airspeed. Calibration is then necessary to correct that value and generate a personal calibration factor that solves this issue. What is a calibration factor? It's a number used in the calculation of CDA and the wind speed. It is related to the way that the wind impacts the cyclist and the position of the Notio on the bike. So how do we calibrate this? So now our app has the screenshot on the right. So go on ahead, thanks. So as you can see on the screenshots, our app offers automatic methods in order to guide through the process called the benchmark ride. It will allow you to determine your calibration factor and set your initial CDA you can use to compare your rides. Please note that calibration can also be performed and analyzed afterwards in Golden Sheet on Notio.
So just another point on that, Martin, and I think it's an important thing to point out, and I kind of skipped over it earlier in the history, but where we're based, the Notio company is based in Montreal. We're very lucky to be part of, there's a large research community for artificial intelligence in Montreal. So a lot of the large technology companies are using this center to help develop. And as we know, the internet and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of things around predicting and all that kind of good stuff. So what's that got to do with this benchmark ride and how we do stuff? And there's as we said earlier, it's a challenge to try and take the Notio device, put it on your bike and go outside. We know there's challenges, and there'll be lots of people who are aerodynamics experts will definitely, rightly so, argue that there's a lot of potential for error. But what we're doing, and our strategy longer term, is investing in how some of this artificial intelligence and some of this technology can be used to reduce and perhaps make the ability of the Notio to become even more accurate than it is currently. And that's a path that we've started, and perhaps not for this webinar, but certainly in the future, we'll be able to talk more about that. And part of the reason why we've introduced the benchmark ride is it's probably a step towards that, in terms of giving users the ability to go out, make a test. Once you've chosen the right place and you're riding safely. And then to provide that intelligence while you're out there. You don't want to have to come back, sit at a computer, and as I said, using the power meter example of many, many moons ago, you had to come back and download the data and look and everything. And of course, now you can just see it straight away on your head unit. You can do some brief analysis, with your phone. And obviously, we have the advantage of developing a product now where we can do that. But I just thought I'd make that point as we're, talking about outside testing and removing, any sort of areas of error. We are working very hard, and there is a program. And as I said, being located in Montreal, we have got presence with this Mila, which is a research center, and we actually have a desk there and so on. But again, we'll probably talk about that in a future webinar to explain. So again, sorry, Martin, but I just thought an important point for people to be aware of.
Yes, of course, totally. Thanks, Ed. So before my colleague Finn go further on with the benchmark ride, I was just saying that you need to do a benchmark ride to calibrate the device for your own personal setup. It's important to remember to recalibrate if the Notio changes position. For example, if you change your stack height or change your TT extension position. In some very specific cases where you would want to test the difference between a TT position and an upright position, for example, base bar, you would also need to recalibrate because the wind flow around the Notio will have changed. So Finn can go on with the benchmark right now.
Okay, so we're just going to look at a few things to consider when performing a benchmark ride. We've got the course, the conditions, and then we'll move on to the potential error messages and repeatability after that. So a few key points when looking at the course. We've got out and back. In the app, you'll see it recommends 3 kilometers out and 3 kilometers back. But this can be reduced if you don't have a stretch of road that's long enough. I'd recommend it's better doing a shorter distance on a good stretch of road than the full 3K on a worse road where the results may be a bit iffy. But we at least recommend doing 1.5K out and 1.5K back. I'd say this is the bare minimum to get good data from your test run. And you should keep in mind, like wherever or however you're riding, you should ride in a position which you're able to sustain for both the out and the back. Riding in this constant position is really important. As we mentioned, the same start and finish. We recommend you've got to have the same start and finish for it to be a successful benchmark ride. For the Notio algorithms to calculate your benchmark CDA, the ride must finish and start in the same place. And then we mentioned not too many corners. This is mainly because it can alter your position when you corner. Even though if it's a corner, you can pedal around and you can stay tucked up on the extensions or on your drops. It's natural to want to lift your head to look around the corner, and it can alter your position a little bit. So yeah, we recommend not too many corners, and it's the same with elevation and descending. We recommend it's fairly flat, so you're not trying to lift yourself up to get air in when you're climbing. And then we'll move on to conditions, where we've got
just before that, Finn. The other thing as well is I guess accelerations and deaccelerations also, because if you have if you introduce some corners, you're going to have to press the pedals a little bit harder. So
for sure.
I mean, these are, obviously, again, we'll make recommendations, and we know we've got users now pretty much all continents on the world. I mean, in the current climate, yes, there's some people unfortunately cannot get out, but we know that in the UK the road system is slightly different to what we have in Canada, to what we have in United States to Australia. And also it's the weather varies greatly. However, the advantage, of course, is that we're learning about this information and obviously adapting the product to allow us to do that. And again, already we're working on improvements around the app itself, where some of these things are taken into consideration. So as with any piece of software and app, it's never stationary. It's always an evolving piece. So anyway, the right conditions, Finn, I guess is the
so we say the
thing.
perfect conditions, but it's hard to get the perfect conditions. So we mentioned low wind, and obviously a bit of wind's fine, but if it's gusty and inconsistent, and maybe from like a lateral wind, crosswind, it might affect the results a bit. So try and pick a route which you can avoid this, or pick a time where you can avoid this. Dry, even though Notio's water resistant, we advise you don't test in the rain or if there's standing water on the road, because if the water can bring up bits of dirt or grit on the road, and these can end up blocking the pitot tube if you test in these conditions. And then traffic free, ideally traffic free. We know this isn't possible for most people, but if you try and choose a road with minimum traffic and as little large traffic as possible, so like trucks and lorries, because these can really affect the wind speed, either make it spike or make it low, depending on which way the traffic's going. So on to the next slide, we've got the potential error messages you may see. So to start off with, we've got, these error messages come up when the test result's rejected. It happens because if there's too large a disparity between the out and the inward trip, it's an indication that like one or two of the test conditions haven't been consistent during the ride. So it might be caused by a difference in altitude. It can often be caused if it's not started or stopped in the right position, and you're on a hillier course. We've got the difference in wind speed may affect it. This is often if there's turbulence from traffic or wind gusts or crosswinds, as I mentioned before.
And just on that, Finn, again, I mean, because we've been working on this project for a number of years, and obviously extensive testing and stuff like that, we believe that the software, obviously an area that we put a lot of effort into, and obviously we've made the mention of algorithms and stuff like that. So we do use this information to try and improve. And as I said, again, back to this this whole the point of the product being able to test outside and deal with these errors. But what we're finding is the more advances we make, then it becomes better. And obviously the potential error messages, it's another way of knowing that when you're outside doing something, when you're using the product, you haven't gone all the ways home and downloaded data to find that you've that's not working. Because if you've got a 1.5 kilometer to 3 kilometer out and back that you're doing your test on, if something doesn't go quite right, you've got the chance to go and collect more data. And again, just for everybody's benefit, what we're saying is that this is in the context of you looking to find a baseline and a benchmark CDA for you as a rider. Okay, so it's not something, and as we said earlier, you don't have to go and do this baseline benchmark right every single time you go out, and that's an important point. So once the system has a baseline, and back to my point earlier about your baseline power, your FTP power, it's you want to know what that baseline is. So if you do want to go and test helmets and you want to go and test something else, you know what you're comparing it against. So that's quite important. But the error messaging, we don't want you to, people to look here, especially people who may have already got the product or may be thinking of it. It's there for a reason, because we want to make sure that you get good data, from using the device.
Yeah. So when we're talking about wind speed, I'd say to put a number on it, if it's stable, ideally it could be around 8 to 10 kilometers an hour. That would be a good place to have the wind. 8 to 10 kilometers an hour or below, I'd say that would avoid having an error message. And
those of you living in the Northern Hemisphere over the last couple of weeks, months, that's probably been a bit difficult to find. So it's hopefully the weather gets a bit more stable, and in these terrible, unfortunate circumstances, depending on where you are, hopefully you'll have a little bit of time to get out on your bikes and do some testing and so on. And obviously we hope that this information will help also.
So next we've got the difference in distance on the out and back points. And as I mentioned before, again, it needs to start and finish in the same place. So yeah, that's what that error message would be from. Next, a difference in CDA out and CDA back. This doesn't have to be, your CDA doesn't have to be exactly the same on the out and back, but it has to be within a certain limit. So this will be caused if your body changes too much, or if you're accelerating and decelerating too much. Say if a car pulls out and you've got a brake, this may be why a test has failed. And then impossible to find intervals for out and back. This will be when it can't recognize whether you've turned around or not. So this may be caused if you've not gone far enough out. So if you've gone less than 1.5 kilometers, it won't recognize you turning around. And then speed and power connection, which will be caused by speed sensor and power meter dropouts. So check your speed sensors are charged or have batteries in, and make sure they're paired before you start.
On the power meter issue, again, it's a variable for sure, and we do have more advanced analysis in Golden Cheetah, so we can actually, on deeper analysis, pick up on drivetrain efficiency and stuff like that. And again, the this will be some older power meters. Some brands we won't even need to mention. But I think now, as we're certainly seeing on the power meters on the newer models that we're testing against, and again on our FAQ on our website, we mention some of the different ones that we have. So we know that there's definitely if we go and compare to a very old one to some of the new ones, there's obviously a huge difference, and I'm sure some of you who have used power meters will have seen that as well, where the potential quality of data has certainly improved. So,
and then hopefully you get a message at the end saying the calibration ride's been successful. So next we've got moving on to repeatability. We've recently done a blog article with Martin Toff, speaking about how he makes his data repeatable and precise. So we'll talk about that a bit later. So yeah, previously we mentioned the protocol methods, and it's important to consider the procedure used for when you're testing as well. This will include when you're testing and also how you test. So first we've got same day, and we'd recommend, if you're testing two components against each other, to get the most accurate data, I'd recommend doing it on the same day, just because the conditions it'll be most similar, or most likely to be the most similar. Also, you'd have to take a note of everything you're wearing, because it's no good testing a set of wheels if you're wearing one day wearing a set of aero socks and one day wearing normal socks. So another thing to look out for is either testing on the same day or making a note of everything you're using. We'll move on to precision. Again, making sure everything's the same, but this we can add to this concentrating on keeping in a solid position that not only you can maintain from one test run, but you can maintain from a whole day of testing. So this can be down to your finger position even. So try and concentrate on and remember how you're holding your boards, etc. Because it'll all make a difference to when you're testing. Also, make sure if you change your cockpit or change your position on your bike, we recommend you do a calibration run again, as this can alter your calibration factor. So you'd need to get a new calibration factor before you test. So now we'll move on to repeatability. And this is where Martin Toft did a blog and told us how he tests with the Notio. There are two ways to do it. You can either do, as you can see, A, B, A, B. So A being one setup and B being another setup, or A, B, 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 and then back to A. For most cyclists, doing A, B is a bit difficult because you're constantly making changes to your bike, and if you're doing a day of testing, you know how tiring it can be, and it can make the day even longer. So by doing the second method, A, B, 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 and then back to A, it means you can just get test runs done, then make the changes after. But then make sure you go back to A just to make sure the accuracy is there in your testing. Obviously, this topic.
Just on that point, Finn, again, I'm just putting my coach hat back on here for a second, because, and I guess because, some people may have been very fortunate enough to go to a wind tunnel and do some testing, and some of these protocols are adopted in that scenario also. But if you think of the time it takes to go and the money you spend to go and do that, obviously with the Notio, you can do this anytime you want. But I also would make the point that, in some cases, and again, I'll use certain, we've seen people make huge advantages, in terms of testing outside. And, we're working with some, unfortunately, they're not racing right now, but some World Tour level riders who, go in the wind tunnel, then go outside and go, hang on, there's a gap between what I've got on the wind tunnel numbers or the track testing, and I'm not able to recreate those outside. And I guess one of the dilemmas they face is actually how much time they can actually do and spend the testing. And my question back to them is to say, actually, hang on, if you're in a GC position and you need to make sure that you don't lose 13 seconds or 20 seconds in that scenario, how much is that worth to you? And then the AB versus AABB testing and the time it takes becomes very, very valuable. So I think, what we're trying to say is that, yes, we want to make it easier. We want to make it more convenient while you're out there testing. But at the same time, as you develop your use of the tool, and it's a long-term relationship you have with the tool, again, not to labor the point, but you didn't stick a power meter on day one and figure everything out. It took time. You got to learn how to use it. You got to learn how to get the most out of it. And I think it's fair to say people are still learning and getting more out of power meters and how to train and how to sort of correlate to RPE and all that kind of good stuff. And I think for aero testing outside, it's exactly the same. And it's, we always say to, even, if you've got somebody who's looking to improve on triathlon or time trial or whatever it might be, then it becomes really, really powerful to say, actually, I can invest this time, and ask yourself the question: if you've reached a plateau or physiological plateau in terms of your training, you know, maybe some of your sessions become really important to go and do this kind of testing. Yes, it takes time, but the gain you make is potentially, quite significant.
Yeah, so I'm nearly at the end of this section. Obviously, all of this that we're mentioning can be used when you're testing indoors as well on the velodrome. And if you haven't already, I'd recommend going over to the blog on our website and having a look at some of the articles I mentioned. Yeah.
And on the blog as well, just so you're aware, I mean, we've got a newsletter, and we're trying to, publish and share a lot of information and use of the product. So make sure you subscribe, and if you don't know where those are, just get in touch, and we're happy to do that. But we're trying to, use the experience we've gained, and we've got a program to obviously share a lot more of that information, which will hopefully allow your use of the product and help get the most out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
So now it's over to Martin, who's going to explain the indoor testing.
All right. Thank you, Finn. So now that we've covered the outdoor testing, let's talk about indoor velodrome testing. So as some of you might know, the benchmark ride tool is based on performing an out and back, and that is not possible or really practical in velodrome. However, we know that a lot of you train inside during winter, or simply because track is your discipline. We currently don't have a velodrome specific benchmark test and app. However, we do have a velodrome specific testing protocol to record and analyze your data. So this will require to use of our Golden Cheetah Notio edition, which is available for download on our website. You can find it on our page notio.ai. It will be the link will be in the footer. So the document we also have on your left, on your right, sorry, at the quick start user guide, Golden Cheetah Notio. This document will be released in the next days about getting started with Golden Cheetah Notio. And in this document, we teach you how to find your calibration factor while you're benchmark test ride in the velodrome. So on the next slide, I will explain how this all works. So testing in a velodrome is quite light. What we previously covered, the testing protocol guidelines are much the same. The protocol that we suggest to do, which is going pretty fine for most of our indoor tester, you need to perform 3,000 meters lap at a steady pace, making sure to hold the same position during the whole test. Recording can be done with normal riding mode accessed in the app. You can then upload your files to the app and access them via your online account in Golden Cheetah Notio Edition. A Golden Cheetah, you will be able to calculate your calibration factor and get you indoor velodrome aerotest result CDA. The specifics on how to perform this are covered in a specific guide, as I mentioned previously, that will publish by the end of the week, of this week. So keep in mind that for indoor testing, altitude can be set to 0 in Golden Cheetah. And specific for this are also to be covered in the guide.
Just one other point on this as well is, again, I've worked with lots of people where they've done the velodrome testing. if you take the data into Golden Cheetah, there is the opportunity for you to get the raw data out in a CSV file format. So if you do want to use another tool to do some analysis, which some people do, and that's obviously, you know, another technical level again, but we are aware that some people will collect the data and go and analyze, but that's also another useful feature. So it allows you to take that and maybe you want to compare, you know, so we have some people who are using it to look at formation in team pursuit and stuff like that. So the analysis isn't necessarily done inside here, but it can be used elsewhere. So that's obviously another level again, but it is available for you to do if you want to do that.
All right, so this is pretty much it for indoor velodrome testing. So you can go on ahead.
Sure. So I think we may have been answering some of these questions as we've gone along, but let's just double check. We've yeah, I think yeah, unless there's okay, so we've got let me see. If we have a fixed position for the no-show, let's say fixed to the base bar, do we need to run a benchmark when testing different stack heights in the TT position? Base bar stays the same. That's a good question. Right, okay, so let's take that. Okay. Yeah, so one of the things I would say about that is that if you're testing outside, the base bar position for the Notio isn't in an ideal position, as it will be impacted by the wind coming from one side or the other. So one of the things we recommend is that the Notio should be mounted as far forward as you possibly can. And actually, we've just recently done some videos to help around this as well. So it'll be quite it can be quite useful. So and obviously the other important thing is to make sure it's centered. So so that should so the recommendation there is you try and position it as far forward using the mount on the TT bars as opposed to the base bar. So next one, wind direction influences the performance of the test. What wind speed affects the test? That's a good question. So let's see. We just come back to that in a second. Yeah, so on the wind speed, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. I mean, our recommendation is that you have, you know, something around 8 to 10 kilometers is ideal, or below, obviously. And then obviously if it's, you know, anything that's, you know, as we mentioned earlier, traffic can cause fluctuations and stuff like that. But when you're doing a benchmark test, you would get that as a sort of a critical thing anyway. So I would go back and say, okay, the important thing is to make sure you've got stable conditions when you're doing a benchmark test, and so on. So I'm just going to ask another colleague to join, because we've got some other no-show colleagues here who will be able to answer some more of these questions as I go through them. So rather than me trying to read and answer at the same time. So let's, yeah. Hi, Guillaume.
Hi, guys. I've been following from a distance. We're all
so
working.
Guillaume Lamy's our product manager. So we'll let Guillaume answer some of these more technical questions. So over to you, Guillaume. Thank you.
So I'll get to the questions. So I'll just go through them one after the other. Mostly all of those questions are actually going to be answered pretty soon in a video series that we're pushing out. We're actually approving them this week, just in time for the for the COVID season where everybody needs to stay in-house. So we'll have some content ready. So we'll be covering you know, the basic setup, how to put it on your bike, different recommendations, going over benchmark again, all the things we covered today. So I'll start again, maybe with some questions that were already asked, but you know, if we have a fixed position for the Notio, let's say fixed to the base bar, do we need to run a new benchmark when testing different stack heights in the TT position? You know, base bar stays the same. The main thing, the main recommendation we have usually for a normal setup is that the Notio is affixed, as Ed's mentioned, as far forward as possible. So that means that usually you would fix it on your TT extensions, meaning that it's kind of easy. You see if the Notio moves around. If you change your stack, well, basically it moves, so you recalibrate. Then it gets a bit more complicated if you actually affix it to your base bars. The main recommendation for base bars, as we said, that it needs to be centered. So if you do put it on the right or left side of your base bars, the problem is that then the device could get a wrongful reading from the wind. If ever you have some yaw and it comes from the opposite side where the device is positioned, well, then we won't capture, you know, the full spectrum of what the Notio usually is able to capture. So again, really the recommendation is to put centered. So if you use like a let's say a kind of the lollipop actually I'm losing my English, but it's the the form of a lollipop where you can attach your mount, the Notio. So that usually makes sure that it's fixed and centered. What happens there, you have to keep in mind that even though that the Notio doesn't move, like you saw in the webinar, there's an image where we see the frontal impact of being in a TT position towards airflow coming, you know, between your TT position and the wheel. So you have to take that into account. So basically, if you consider that the frontal position affects the airflow going towards the Notio, you should recalibrate. So let's say you try an example. Let's say you are affixed to the base bar and you just change slightly the width of your extensions. That shouldn't affect too much the frontal area of where the wind affects the Notio. But if you do change your stack or change the angle of your bars, well then for sure it's going to change your position relative to the Notio. So that's going to affect airflow. So you should recalibrate then. So the idea is, let's say you do try two different positions. It's almost like if the Notio moved. So it affects airflow. You should recalibrate in those circumstances. So the thing is to remember is once you've done your test and you found your CDA and you calibrated for that position. So when you go ride again and train and do longer rides out of the benchmark mode, well then you know, make sure that your device is calibrated for that position and not for another one that you tested before. Hope this answers the questions. If not, just write in the comments and you know, I can give you further details. So basically, yes, you know, you have to take into account all these factors and how the wind influences the Notio and the airflow.
Guillaume, just another question in there. Do I need to carry my iOS device on the bike during my benchmark ride and our test rides?
So on that, there's multiple different scenarios in which you could, you know, start the Notio. You know, there's the head unit, there's the Notio itself, and there's the app. So for sure, the app is always necessary to actually do the initial setup, because basically it's the app that allows for the, you know, to access the communication of the Notio, and then the Notio can pair with all the different settings. So the app is always necessary for pairing and initial setup. After that, there's different ways of using the devices. If you actually paired it with your Garmin, you can use the Garmin when you start the ride. If it's paired and you've got the IQ fields installed, well then by starting your Garmin and your ride, you should see the Notio start blinking on the side, the green light. The green light sometimes in sunny conditions, it's hard to see, so make sure you really look close at it. But if it's blinking, it's recording. The only thing is that at that point, it'll be harder for you to know if it's, if it's capturing your power meter and your speed sensor. So, after you've used it a couple of times and you're comfortable with it, I would say that at that point you can start, using the head unit. But on the first few attempts, just make sure that you have your app with you on your phone, just to make sure that, everything is working fine. But once you get comfortable, for sure, you can use the head unit. And there's a more advanced way of using it. Actually, you can use it without the head unit. On the side of the device, the power button, once it's powered on, and it's been on for about 10 seconds, there's like a boot sequence. After about 10 seconds of being powered on, you can tap 2 times really fast on the power button, and it's actually going to start the recording. And you press 2 times again, and then that will stop the recording. That's another way of using it. But basically, when you're doing that, you should be really comfortable with the device. And knowing that you always need a power meter and a speed sensor. And when you're just using the Notio alone without the app or a head unit, you have no way of actually knowing if it's paired or not. So just be careful when you use these different scenarios.
And then the next question is, could you tell me how to best preserve the battery when the device is not being used for a while over the winter? Good question. Well,
for sure, the type of battery that we use, if you leave it at about 80% or full capacity, it should, for sure it should tough for a couple of months without being activated. Best practice would be just to, every 3 months, just to plug it in, make sure that it's the battery is stable. But if you leave the battery 80% to 100%, when comes after 3 or 4 months, when you take it out, it should still be stable. Just then make sure that you plug it in again and put it back to 100%.
And then another question.
If ever anybody has problems with the battery or anything with the product, we're really backing it up. That's why we're all here. So just contact support. We'll make sure that we find a quick resolution to any hardware problems that you might encounter or questions that you might have.
Can we get comparable results from track to outdoor testing using Golden Cheetah is the question, I guess. So
on that subject, the main thing to remember is there's a big debate, what's your CDA? When you go to wind tunnel, can you compare those numbers to track indoors, to track outside, to outdoor conditions? Well, the thing to remember is that CDA is a relative value, especially at the speeds at which we're taking the measures. Aerodynamics is a very complicated field, but in the speeds between 20 kilometers an hour and 80 kilometers an hour, turbulence can affect all the measurements. So what's important what I want to get at is that you might not have the exact same CDA number. So you go in a wind tunnel or in a track and you see a 0.265. When you go outside, you might have a 0.255 or a 0.26. It's also relative to the speed at which you captured your data. That doesn't mean to say that the CDA is wrong or that one is better than the other. What's important to remember, it's the deltas that are important. So every time that we do tests, and we'll try to write articles about that also, but let's say we go in the wind tunnel, and that's what we've recently done. We tested the same positions that we did test in a velodrome and that we did test outside. What we got as a result was slight variations in the CDA, but no variations on the deltas. So meaning that that's what you test. So if you test 2 or 3 different positions in a velodrome, you should get to a very low amount of margin of error, the same deltas when you go outside. So on that point, I won't give you the exact precision of it. We'll have some more data about it. Is it 1 or 2% difference? It's there or below, but basically your deltas should be the same. So when you compare your results, you should compare your outdoor testing results, keeping that in mind, that it's the deltas between the positions that should be the same. And then once you know that, you can try to kind of derive what variations you have from outdoor to indoor. In the future, we'll try to have tools to kind of help you with that a bit more, but that's basically it. I don't know if I got too complicated or not, Ed, Was that a
No. I think
answer?
that's yeah, and again, as we said, you know, we've got two areas that you can contact us. Obviously, support, but we've also started to build out a knowledge base. I think some of you who've submitted a ticket to get support, it will sort of guide you to that. But again, just reach out to us. You know, it's really easy, and again, we're just trying to make a lot of this information available and more widely. So one last question, Guillaume. Can the battery be replaced like an iPhone when it eventually degrades? So I don't know if you obviously the answer is no, but again, we're trying to make sure that within reason, obviously not years and years and years, but we're trying to be very supportive. So if there is an issue with a battery early on, then we certainly will you know, we'll look at replacing that for sure. So,
well,
but there isn't a
exact
facility.
answer from a product manager standpoint is that yes, you can change the battery, but you can't do it by yourself. So basically, at that point where you've used it so much, the battery should last for a long while. I don't have the exact stats. I think we have them in the FAQ of our website about battery life. But if ever you do find that the battery starts to be faulty or doesn't last as long as it was when you got it out of the box, just contact us, and we can always, you know, we haven't set that up yet, but we'll do like a battery replacement program or something like that, because we can open the device and just put a new battery in. It's just not something that we would recommend you guys to do, and it's not a standard battery you can just take off of the shelves. And if ever you're too far on the other end of the world, well, maybe we'll try to support it in a different way. But for sure, in 2 or 3 years of time, when you do feel that your battery is going down, you know, we'll try to have some kind of a battery replacement system in place. But in the meantime, contact us directly.
Can you compare 2 or more readings side by side? So well, I can answer that actually. So in terms of the on the app currently, it's obviously not easy to compare two. In Golden Cheetah you can. However, and I'm sure Guillaume, you might want to talk about what we've, and again, we'll give you a teaser here, I think, about what's coming, because we do want to talk about that in the next webinar. So I don't know if you want to add any more to that. So it's, I guess, two runs side by side on the app.
Yeah, so you can. So I think my sound cut for a couple of seconds there. Yeah. But if you can compare runs, for sure you can compare runs. But again, there's things that you have to keep in mind. Since again,
yeah, this question is asking, can you do that side by side? So at the moment, doing 2 side by side on the same screen is not possible, right?
Oh no, so we don't have like a compare tool directly in there. You have to, you know, take out your notebook and and take some notes on the side. But
you can do a compare side by side on Golden Cheetah. So that's obviously you know, another step. But right now on the app, if you're at the side of the road, you cannot do a direct comparison. So is that something
where
you
open and close your activity details?
You would, yeah, so go from one activity to the other. Is that something you're planning down the line, Guillaume, for the next release?
So we're actually working really hard on a new version with all that we've learned from you guys in the past month. The compare tool hasn't been baked in because we felt that you can actually like do it in Golden Cheetah if you wanted, or basically get the different CDAs and some of the values out and chart them down on a piece of paper. So going the traditional way there. We're basically on the new release that will be coming. Now things are sort of slowing down a little bit with all the COVID-19, but we were planning for a mid-April release. It may be pushed a month down, just depending on resource availability and stuff like that. But what we're going to be offering is that benchmark tool that we've been talking about. It's kind of hard to get at, and that we do get. You have to go in the settings. You have to have the Notio that's activated, and then to access that tool, it's harder. So we're actually planning to, when you actually start writing, we ask you what are you planning to do. So an easier access to that, and an easier way to actually analyze your data inside of the app, not to compare between rides, but to kind of drill down inside of an actual ride result. These are the actual things that are coming forward. and the availability to create multiple bike profiles, with the app. These are the things that we're actively working on. So the compare tool is something that we do think of, but it's not planned in the near future.
Yeah, and if you want to see how you can do that in Golden Cheetah, we will have some webinar content coming around Golden Cheetah, obviously, because some people do want to analyze and do more sort of in-depth stuff. If you don't want to wait for that, just get in touch and we can show you how to do that, because it's very easy in Golden Cheetah to do side-by-side comparison between two, 3, 4, or 5 different activities. So I think that's hopefully we've answered all the questions. But again, as I said, don't hesitate to get in touch and support, obviously, or through the knowledge base. This webinar has been recorded, so you will be able to re-listen and go back to certain points of it. For sure, you'll get an email there. So unless any of my colleagues have anything else to say, just want to take the opportunity. Thank you very much for your interest in the product. Thank you very much for taking the time and listening to what we've been talking about. There's a lot of information, but thank you. So Guillaume, Martin, Finn, anything else you want to add before we close this off?
I'm good. Thanks, Ed. Thanks to everyone.
Not for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and stay safe out there, and hope you do manage to get out and get some rides in during these difficult times. Have a good day. Thank you.
Much.